give her a chance to finish everything.
Okay, great. We'll do our best, that's for sure. I have a hard time sticking to the time that we have allotted here, but I will do my best. First of all, I'll do a quick introduction. If I've never met you before, my name is Charity Wright. I am from Recorded Future, where I serve as a threat intelligence consultant to 8 of the biggest companies in America. It is really a privilege to be in this position. Before that, I was on our research team called Insect Group for 3 years as the principal China threat researcher, focused on both cyber and geopolitical. Also, in my research time, I have spent a lot of effort analyzing disinformation, mostly foreign disinformation impacting other countries. Some domestic, but I like to stay away from that. It's a little nastier in the political realm. Um, and I've written some frameworks around analyzing disinformation. So we're probably not going to delve into disinfo today, but if you ever have any questions or you need guidance in that area, always feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. My background is US Army. I served in the Army for 10 years as a Chinese linguist. I worked at NSA during that time. And what else I've done? Dark web research, cyber threat intelligence, all kinds of fun stuff. So, very happy to be here again. Thank you, Lisa, so much for inviting me back. I believe this is the fourth year, I think, fourth year. So it's great to be connected with you all. Okay, let me just put my slides up here and we'll jump in. Today, we're going to be talking about a very pertinent topic, which is securing critical infrastructure. And the caveat for this one is we're going to focus on securing this infrastructure during an election year, which we just experienced. So, not only is this relevant for this year and the near future as we transition into a new administration, but it's also very critical for us to keep our eyes on various elements that I bring up today, especially geopolitical elements. So we have a lot going on in the world around us, attacks on critical infrastructure all over the world. And we have, some polarization happening in the world between authoritarians and dictators and then more democratic countries. And it is a push and pull around the world. This past weekend, we saw the Assad regime in Syria fall to the rebels. The US and Israel are both targeting terrorism in those country in Syria to make sure that ISIS doesn't fill that gap where the Assad leadership just fled. But not only that, but we're looking at wartime, Ukraine, Israel, and the possibility of future wars. So keep this in mind as we go through this content today. Now, first, I just want to start off with some big statistics. Okay, this number right here, $5 million. This is a very large number, especially if you're considering, how much we spend on budgets at our companies. $5 million is a lot in the hands of an organization. This number right here is actually the average cost of a data breach in critical infrastructure industries. So we've experienced a 4.5% jump in the average cost of a breach compared to 2023, and that indicates an increase from 4.82 million to 5.04 million. Again, that's about $590,000 higher than the global average. So critical infrastructure is a very sensitive sector made up of multiple industries. So we're just going to skip this one. If you don't know who Recorded Future is, please just reach out. I'll tell you all about who we are as a threat intelligence company. But to save time, today we're going to be touching on who are the victims of these critical infrastructure attacks, who are the adversaries, who are what are their capabilities. We'll touch less on infrastructure because this is not going to be a very technical presentation. We're going to keep it very strategic and operational. And if you recognize what I have on the screen here, this is the diamond model for intrusion analysis. So we're going to be taking 3 out of the 4 elements of the diamond model and taking a look at that. And then we'll take a quick look at the future. If we have time, we'll dig in a little bit to, what are we looking at in the future? So over the past year, we've observed a sharp increase in politically and ideologically motivated cyber attacks around the world. As I mentioned, Ukraine and Russia, and as of October of 2023, Israel and Hamas conflicts have driven threat actors to combine efforts, consolidate resources, and crowdsource help through hacktivism. Now, all of these factors have resulted in a higher risk to critical infrastructure around the world. But we've also got nation state sponsored threat groups, terrorists, hacktivists. They're all rallying together to target ICS, SCADA, and other prominently used technologies. What is their objective? Disruption and distraction, fueled by anger and revenge for perceived wrongdoings. So if you think about how hacktivists get involved, um, I mean, oftentimes hacktivism can lead to real life consequences and sometimes violence. As you all probably heard in the news this week, the CEO of United Health Group was murdered in the streets of New York. They've apprehended a suspect that they believe is strongly tied to this murder. And this suspect has ties to IT and programming and the security community. He had very strong beliefs about the wrongdoings of the healthcare industry. And he expressed some of those both online and then, unfortunately, in person. He took it into his own hands as well. These are the types of threats that we're looking at. It's not just technology, it's not just happening online, it's not just impacting technical systems. This also translates into real world conflict and violence. So we're kind of looking at attacks on critical infrastructure, not just in our own country, but as a global problem. Um, so let's dig in a little bit further. Now, when I started looking into attacks on critical infrastructure, I was very surprised to find that DDoS attacks worldwide increased by 63% last year in 2023 alone. And the main driver of those DDoS attacks was geopolitics. So, conflicts between countries, let's say lack of diplomacy, increase in violence, and as I said earlier, hacktivists are kind of taking things into their own hands by launching these very destructive DDoS attacks. Now, this year was a critical year for elections all over the world. This was actually the biggest year for democratic elections ever in history, with over 60 countries going to the polls, including those that you see here on this screen. Now, this is just representative of national direct elections in 2024, but there's so many more localized elections, regional elections, etc. Now, we did include the European Union on this list as a national direct election, although the European Union is not just one nation, but many. Next year is also going to be a critical year for elections. These countries here are going to the polls. Our friends in Australia, Canada, and the United Nations Security Council will hold an election as well. So this is, this list is really to bring awareness to the fact that although the United States, we often focus just on our own elections and our own politics, there are critical elections happening all over the world that could tip the balance of democracy around the world and the types of freedoms and rule of law that we enjoy today. Um, Unfortunately, democracy is in decline for the 18th consecutive year. So, this is not a good trend. And as many of you know, democracy is really just an experiment. And so far, it's working better in other countries than some others. So, it's interesting to kind of see the dynamics of how easy it is to for a country to fall into a dictatorship or fall into an authoritarian type of rule. And so that is something that we also have to protect our own country from. Now, I say this because one aspect that is kind of tipping the balances of this type of governance is cybersecurity and cyber threats. Our threat actors know that they can easily take out our critical infrastructure or use the access they have to our power grids, to our water facilities, and to all these very important, aspects of the supply chain. They can easily take that out as part of, let's say, a bigger warfare plan, especially when it comes to China. Now, when I say this is critical attacks on critical infrastructure are global, I literally mean global. It is rampant all over the globe. This is just a look at data from the Recorded Future platform. When I put it into timeline view and I'm able to hone in on particular cyber attacks that have happened and targeted critical infrastructure, you can see here there's a variety of different types of victims, targets, technologies, Schneider Electric, wind systems, healthcare, um, airlines. China has hit multiple electric utilities, and we just found out recently that they have access to seven telecom companies. I believe it's seven or eight telecom companies in the United States. And we still don't know the depth and the breadth and how long they've been in those systems. They've successfully been conducting espionage campaigns as well. So as you can see here, anything from, Department of Defense and military to gas companies, oil companies, and rail organizations. So this is a global problem. I know it's easy when we're working for a company in the United States to get caught up in our job and protecting our organization. And Ugh, I know how it feels. I worked in enterprise threat intelligence for a long time, and sometimes it can feel overwhelming. Like, are we ever going to catch up? Are we ever going to, really be able to stop these threats, especially ransomware? But as we can see here, it's a matter of sharing threat intelligence, sharing what you're finding during the incident response process with some of your partners in your industry. Maybe even sharing indicators of compromise with industry peers or competitors, because ultimately all of our businesses will fail if we do not share how the threat actors are targeting us. Because as you can see here, none of these cyber threats are particular really to our organization. Let's go to the next slide and we can have another perspective from a visual standpoint. On the left was 2023, kind of a year in review on targeting of critical infrastructure industries. And you can see here manufacturing is by far the biggest target of these attacks. Ultimately, let's see here what we've got. Manufacturing was the most impacted industry also during the first quarter of 2024, with over 106 observed incidents in total, or 62.7%, actually. That's a huge number. Now, we know that last year, in May of 2023, the Justice Department indicted a Russian national for attacks on US critical infrastructure. Then we found out he was involved in Lockbit, Hive ransomware, and several other ransomware affiliates. And what we know is that they targeted agencies, Government agencies, hospitals, and schools, and their ransom demands topped $400 million, while payouts got them over 200 million. But I mean, that is just one small section of cybercrime overall. We're looking at billions of dollars lost, and I'll touch on more on that total cost in a bit. Now, I'm going to be honest, when I went in to go do this research on attacks on critical infrastructure, me being a China threat expert thought for sure China's going to be one of the biggest threats. Now, much to my surprise, and maybe not to yours, ransomware is the number one threat to critical infrastructure all over the world, but definitely in the US. So I took a look at this report by Dragos where they kind of summarized Q1 and Q2 of this year. And you can see here which groups have played the most prominent part in ransomware incidents this year. So we've got Lockbit 3.0, Play Ransomware, Black Basta, et cetera, et cetera. You can see some of the names here. Very concerning trends. Now, one trend that I really have to point out is quite often we see these numbers and it feels hopeless. And we think, how are we going to catch up? How are we going to get ahead of the threat actor? Well, first of all, we have to understand why they have been so successful. As your attack surface expands, that means you're bringing in new technologies all the time. Your project managers, your infrastructure leaders and owners, they're bringing in all these new technologies and adding them to your technology stack. As your attack surface expands, who is accountable for those technologies and their vulnerabilities? Who is keeping a solid record of new technologies being introduced into your workforce? Is your team able to properly prioritize what needs to be patched first? I mean, ultimately, I think ideally, everybody would have a vulnerability management team. Now, unfortunately, what we've seen from a lot of smaller organizations or even medium size organizations, they don't have a good vulnerability management team. But this is really key. The key here in managing 0 days and vulnerabilities is this: not every critical 0 day exploit is your critical 0 day exploit. If you don't, basically, if you don't have the technology that is being exploited, then you don't have to worry about it. So you have to focus in on prioritization. You have to focus in on what is critical technologies in our organization, what is most widely used in among our employees. Where is our crown jewels and what technology is protecting our crown jewels? And then also, you don't need to just know, okay, there's a new CVE for this, there's a new patch for that. You need some kind of vulnerability intelligence to help you identify this. There's a 0 day available for this technology that you use widely in your company. But not even that, threat actors are talking about using it in the dark web, and they're talking about who they're going to target. They're selling these types of 0 days. So it's very important to have that kind of vulnerability intelligence. Now, speaking of 0 days and dark web sources, you guys know me. I have to touch on this. I'm always looking at what are threat actors talking about in the criminal underground. And so what I looked at was May through August, which is the time I was doing this type of research. And I was looking at mentions of 0 day exploits on dark web sources. And you know what? This is all from the Recorded Future platform. I sorted it down even further by the source and the language, which you can see on the right side. Excuse me, on the right side. And I found pretty interesting. There's a lot of chatter. There's always a lot of chatter around vulnerability exploitation and 0 days. You can see the exact versions the exact technologies that they're talking about targeting. Sometimes they'll even mention a particular company that they want to target. They often will be selling 0 days to each other, buying from each other. You can see what languages they're using, including Serbian, Bulgarian, Russian, oftentimes English and Chinese. In this one, they also have Hebrew, French, Indonesian makes an appearance on there. That's interesting. So it's really cool because this also helps us hone in on alerting companies to who is going to be targeted or what technologies are going to be targeted. If that's in your tech stack, then you'll be alerted right away to, here's the patch or here's the information on how to keep up with this particular exploit. Now, so we've talked about how attacks on critical infrastructure are clearly a global problem because technologies all over the world are being exploited and geopolitics is driving not just the targeting of these companies and organizations, but it's also driving this, let's say, desire to make money. They're very financially motivated cyber criminals, and there's a lot of money to be made, especially in very wealthy countries like the United States. So let's talk about the US a little bit and kind of narrow down. We'll start from macro and go a little bit more micro. Let me see. Yes, okay. It's estimated that cybercrime will make $8 trillion this year, that it may even be more. Some have estimated up to 10 trillion in 2024. Now, according to the World Economic Forum, cybercrime has grown to such an extent that it can now be described as the world's third largest economy after the US and China. That is mind blowing to think that we're just leaking money out to these cyber criminals so much that it would be equivalent to the third largest economy. And that number is expected to reach 10.5 trillion by 2025. So I know that that much money is actually hard to wrap our minds around. So to put this into perspective, Microsoft reported annual revenue of around 200 billion in 2022. Today, cyber criminals share a pot of more than 50 times, 50 times Microsoft's annual revenue. So it's a huge number. We're just think about what your budget is for cybersecurity in your organization. Think about how critical it is for you to protect that budget, and then one ransomware attack, and you're leaking out possibly millions of dollars. So, my whole point in this is that this is not just a global problem, and it's not just an industry problem for those of us in security. Attacks on American institutions rob our economy, our businesses, and our people. This is a detriment to our national security. And finally, on this slide, the economic impact of cybercrime in North America, so including Mexico and Canada, is 0.78% of our GDP. That's just, I think it's intolerable. We have to do more. I think our countries have to work together more as well. And I do have some tips on that at the end. Unfortunately, US is the top target for ransomware last year in 2023 with 44% of the incidents. That is 397 incidents that we know of that were reported in North America. There was many more that were not reported on. And this was Q2 of this year. Ransomware incidents impacting industrial and infrastructure. There were 187 incidents in North America. Yikes. Look at how that compares to the rest of the world. 82 in Europe, only 1 in Africa, 3 in Australia, 29 in Asia. This clearly is the US and North America being a heavy target. Like I mentioned, it's the money, it's the geopolitics. There's a lot to be said about those two aspects for sure. I did the same thing when I looked up cyber attacks on US critical infrastructure. And this is just a small sample between January and August. This is an 82% sample of what I pulled here. And you can see, starting at the beginning, attacks on energy and natural resources. The China's Volt typhoon hit the electric utilities. U.S. issued sanctions on Iran for their attacks on uh, posted images on screens of controllers manufactured by an Israeli company. We've got nuclear fuel manufacturers being targeted. That's kind of scary. And then as you go through this timeline, you can see aerospace, defense, wastewater, hydroelectric, all different types of industries in the critical infrastructure sector. And okay, so this says last 3 months, but this was basically August through October. And this was another sample: healthcare, airports, defense, the Port of Seattle, um, Avis cars, US intelligence files, and of course, water utilities is a huge concern as well. Oh, and by the way, what you see here on this slide is only a 2% sample of what of cyber attacks on critical infrastructure between August and October. So keep that in mind. There's so many more than what you see on this screen. Now, I know I probably started scaring some of you, like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? Does anybody have any questions so far about uh, global attacks or US attacks on critical infrastructure?
You're
Okay.
you're on track with the scaring as usual.
Awesome. There will be hope at the end.
Good.
Okay, so hacktivists have been very active, and it kind of reminds me of, the Guy Fawkes story and remember the 5th of November. And a lot of people watch films and TV, and I think that we've been a little caught up in Hollywood portrayals of these types of vigilantes, especially when you see the reactions online to the assassination of the United Health Group CEO this week. It's been honestly kind of terrifying to see how jaded people are. But also, hacktivism has become very active and lucrative for cyber criminals and activists around the world. Hacktivism poses serious risks to democracy and national security because it combines cyber attacks with information operations like disinformation campaigns and propaganda to achieve their strategic goals. Why is the US such a big target? Well, many reasons, like what you see on the screen here. We tend to get involved in a lot of conflicts around the world. We have obligations to allies and friends to, let's say, defend them with our military. We provide weapons to other countries like Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel. And we are members of NATO, which immediately puts a target on our back from Russia and China, especially Russia and China. They hate NATO. We are still the global leader and economic power in the world, number one still. And we have a democratic form of governance. We allow free speech, we allow freedom of press, and authoritarians and dictators see that as hostile. Those efforts often turn into protests like the Arab Spring in their own countries, which they're trying to quell. So they would rather target our democracies and tear us down and try to evolve us, or let's say devolve our democracy, so that then they can have more stable systems as well. Um, we have rich corporate targets. We have as much corruption in our company and government as others do, although there's a lot of perceived corruption that drives violence, like what happened this week. And of course, there's a fear of accelerationism. Accelerationism is a range of revolutionary and reactionary ideas in left-wing and right-wing ideologies that call for drastic intensification of capitalist growth, technological change, infrastructure sabotage, and other processes of social change. So they're trying to destabilize the existing systems that we have and create radical social transformation, otherwise referred to as acceleration. So keep this in mind, whether it's religious in ideology or political, there is this kind of rushing to conclusions on, oh, it's the apocalypse. It's the end of the world. We're going to have World War III. There's a lot of talk like that because things are very unstable and there's a lot of uncertainty in our world today. And hacktivists really prey on that. This was a DDoS breakdown of DDoS attacks by country. As you can see, USA and China are at the top. I did not see evidence for why this is, but if I were to take a guess, I would guess that we have a lot more Internet of Things devices, connected to the internet. So they're more likely to be infected with malware and brought into a botnet used for DDoS attacks, or targeted by DDoS attacks. Now, there's two major prominent hacktivist threats right now to the US. One is Iran and the other is Russia. Now, when I say this, what I don't necessarily mean that they're all tied to the governments of these countries, but there are many hacktivist groups now in both of these countries that are sponsored by their governments. And this is somewhat of a recent development over the last several years. We've started getting the evidence of those attributions. So in Iran, you can see there's several groups: Green Bravo, which is known as APT 42, Green Charlie. Some of these names are kind of funny, like Mint Sandstorm. Okay. Cyber Avengers, and they primarily use phishing attacks, data exfiltration, and hack and leak operations to conduct their attacks. And one of the most prominent attacks this year was these groups targeted the US presidential campaigns, both Biden campaign and the Trump campaign. Now in Russia, we've got Killnet, Anonymous Sudan, Revol, Cyber Army of Russia. They've been known to target US critical infrastructure and SCADA systems, as well as US and European financial institutions. Now, one bullet I had to point out was that APT 44, they create hacktivist personas to then take the blame for nation state sponsored operations. So they kind of use it as a cover up, but we know better. We know it's them. So, nation state targeting of US critical infrastructure. I want to put this on a graph. And on the left, you'll see intent. On the bottom is opportunity. And I tried to roughly plot where these nation states stand as far as targeting the US critical infrastructure. So, first of all, I want to address China. Um, China, like you'll see headlines like this, they've been known to target critical infrastructure. I put this together several months ago, and not knowing that there was evidence that China had infiltrated our telecom companies. And now we know that that has also been done. So, really, there's not many areas of critical infrastructure that Chinese threat actors haven't touched yet. So I put them at the very highest for intent and opportunity to target US critical infrastructure. Next would be Russia. We have seen them target water utilities, energy department, all different types of critical infra. And they are very sophisticated at this because they've had a lot of practice targeting Ukraine. And they still target Ukraine. Every day, our research team is publishing new notes and new reports about, how Russia has conducted these types of cyber attacks on Ukrainian critical infrastructure. in this war. Now, a little bit lower on the intent to target US critical infrastructure and definitely lower in opportunity would be the North Koreans. Their state sponsored hackers have hit critical infrastructure, but it's less often and less severe than some of their other attacks, which usually target financial institutions and cryptocurrency companies. And last but not least is Iran. Now, Iran definitely has proven that they have the capability and an opportunity to target our vulnerabilities in our critical infrastructure. They have this year attempted to interfere in the presidential election, just like they did 4 years ago. And obviously, the US government is, seeking a lot of information, any kind of tips about the Iranian leaders behind the group called Cyber Avengers. So just wanted to kind of put that into perspective because we mostly focus on ransomware and cybercrime, but nation state targeting of US critical infrastructure is also a significant threat. So, I'm not going to go too far in depth on this, but if you hadn't heard any reports about what China was doing to target our power grids, this was an actual project that I was involved in directly, whereas I helped uncover some of these indicators of compromise and helped reach out to some of the power companies. Back in 2021, a China-based hacking group that we call Red Echo, targeted the India power sector. And they were able to successfully infiltrate the IT systems of this, power sector in India, in Mumbai, as well as one of the ports, like a shipping port, which they compromised as well. At first, we thought this could be espionage, but then we quickly realized that they were having a very tense time at the border between India and China. There was a skirmish, some military people from both sides had been injured. I think somebody may have had a fatality as well. So there was significant tension happening. Now, around that same time that we detected that activity in those systems through our network traffic analysis, the power grid in Mumbai went down. It completely shut down. It was a significant event. You can look it up as in the New York Times based on our reporting. Now, we did not go to lengths to attribute the power outage to this China hacking group, but the New York Times did. You know how the media just takes technological reports and runs with it. Although there was some anecdotal evidence, and we passed that evidence on to the India CERT and allowed them to do their research and attribution on their side. But still, China has proven um, dating back to 2021 that they're capable of infiltrating power grids and they are willing to possibly turn off the lights and turn off power if necessary during a geopolitical conflict. So, this is something that we're watching very closely. Um, Recent events include an attack on Tata Power, a major Indian energy company. And also, we saw them conducting reconnaissance activity against the Texas Power Grid organization here, which then we were able to reach out and notify them right away of that reconnaissance activity. And we were able to help them defend their IT systems here in Texas. Which, by the way, if you didn't know, I'm in Dallas, Texas, um, pretty far away, but we have our own power grid in Texas. So it went down in early 2021 due to a deep freeze. Hopefully, things are more stable now, but now we're just working really hard to help them secure our critical infrastructure here in this state. Now, I did a lookup in Recorded Future of what are the top MITRE TTPs used in attacks against critical infrastructure between January and August. And this is what I discovered, and I put it into this heat map, and I pulled out some of the what you see in the red squares. It's very tiny text. So they use valid accounts to gain access. They compromise accounts. They use phishing. They use ransomware, which is data encrypted for impact. They do external remote services, and they use remote services for lateral movement, and they exfiltrate data. So this is ransomware groups, nation state groups. This is a variety of threat actors, but these are their top tactics for targeting critical infrastructure. Okay. So, as you know, I've really focused a lot, or you may not know, my focus this year has been on election security. And so, this is how I kind of did a mashup between securing critical infrastructure and securing our elections. These are some of, we know that threat actors managed to infiltrate the networks of election offices in multiple states back in 2022. And according to a Senate intelligence report this year, adversaries were targeting all 50 states. So it's not just the federal elections, it's not just federal government, but it's also state and local level as well. Cyber threat actors have ramped up their targeting of elections this year with a flood of malicious activity expected to expected to peak in November and start dying down soon. But we're still on high alert going into Inauguration Day in January. So we're still watching for any kind of hack and leak operations, espionage operations, et cetera, et cetera. Now, these are some of the assessments that we made. We earlier this year we wrote a report at Recorded Future about what was likely to happen to impact or try to target the elections. And believe it or not, almost all of these have already happened. So we've seen disruptive attacks, destructive attack, hack and leak operations. Oh, let me go back here, attacks on voter databases. So this is the kinds of stuff that we saw. Luckily, our US infrastructure, our companies, our government was very well prepared for these types of attacks and targeting. So they were able to, defend against these for the most part, and respond very quickly to protect our election. Okay, this one is a public service announcement. This was a joint advisory by FBI and CISA talking about ransomware disruptions during voting periods and how it will not impact the security and resiliency of vote casting and counting. So they had backup plans on backup plans for this. And as far as we know, the election this year went off without any major security issues or disruption. So very, very good to see that we've made great progress. And I have to highlight that because sometimes with threat intelligence briefings, it's a lot of scary stuff. It's like overwhelming. This is a huge problem. But the fact is, we are making huge strides. And that is because of people like you who are working very hard to protect your organizations every day, to share intelligence, share those indicators of compromise, and have meetings like this where we can come together and talk about what are we going to face in the future. Now, as I kind of wrap up this particular presentation, I do want to, um, well, first of all, I'm going to kind of skip the foreign malign influence operations. As you all know, disinformation is a bigger problem than ever in history. Propaganda from foreign governments is especially a huge threat to democratic nations because we have this very free, open system where we have freedom of speech and freedom of press. Anything can be said. And Russia and China and these, foreign adversaries, they know our vulnerability. And that is, we can read anything on the internet and believe it as truth. So they're very good at spreading lies and misinformation. And I don't want to go too far in depth on this, but I do want to point out something that I think you can take with you and remember is when you're scrolling through social media or you're looking for news media and sources of truth, remember that you have a truth bias. We all have a truth bias. That means we believe what we see and hear first and what we see and hear the most. Essentially, social media is the ultimate weapon for spreading disinformation. And on that point, remember this, that the best lies are mostly truth. Oftentimes, threat actors, whether they're US politicians or foreign adversaries, they will package together a few pieces of truth and one lie, kind of like that game, two truths and a lie. Well, unfortunately, we as a free society have the responsibility to discern and decipher what is truth versus fiction. And it's very often challenging to find those sources of truth. I recommend looking up the media bias chart. It's created by Ad Fontes. I find it to be very accurate. And I know many of the people that have put work into that bias chart, and they all have very differing views. So if you look up your bias chart, identify your favorite sources of news and media on that chart, and just observe. Don't judge. Don't judge yourself. If you find out that your favorite source of news is very far left or very far right or very this or that, just observe and ask yourself if you'd be willing to explore maybe a source of news that comes from a less biased source, or a source that is known to be more truthful or less trying to influence your opinion and more about giving you facts. I highly recommend you explore those sources. I know a few of them are AP and Reuters are pretty well known and less biased than other sources. Um, but remember that when you're looking for real information, looking for sources of truth, um, the most successful lies tend to be part truth as well. So that's really what I want to emphasize about disinformation. If you're going to take anything from this presentation about that, now, we did make some predictions this year around what kind of election threats we were going to face, disinformation threats, and all of our predictions came true. Foreign and domestic actors used various disinformation tactics to influence the outcomes of the elections. That's true, that happened. Russia and China conducted influence operations targeting Western elections, especially as it pertains to what interests them, their objectives, like the war in Ukraine, or let's say making sure that nobody tries to influence Taiwan other than them. Um, so all of our predictions for this year came true. That's based on years of research and knowledge about our foreign threat actors. And yeah, we're very proud. Oh, look at those cute little check marks. We're very proud to say we got all of them right. Now, I'm just going to forward through. As you can see here, looking into the future, as we do at Recorded Future, AI, deep fakes, photo manipulation, combined with elements of disinformation, create a very dangerous information ecosystem. We all have major problems with trust and transparency right now. A lot of people have a crisis of trust in authorities. And so we, as security personnel and as researchers, are constantly trying to create certainty and give solid analysis of what the real threats are out there so that you and your businesses can measure that risk and make decisions based on those risks and based on that analysis. So that's kind of how we approach disinformation for corporations and threat intelligence. Now, I think I just have a few slides left here. This section really focuses on how states are a target of, attacks of critical infrastructure as well. I mentioned to you that China was conducting reconnaissance activity. You can see here that that group was Volt Typhoon, the same one that had been targeting other critical infrastructure. And they had targeted the Public Utility Commission of Texas, ERCOT, which is our power grid company, and the US Navy, as well as an ISP, a US internet service. So we successfully detected that activity as soon as it was happening, reported it to that group, was able to help protect them from that Chinese threat. Lots of nation state threats targeting the US. Right now, they're primarily positioning themselves, like pre-positioning in our infrastructure. We believe that it would be for, in case we go into a conflict with one of these nation states, they want to have that leverage over us. But luckily, CISA is on top of it. They're doing great work at collaborating with private sector as well. So, wow, right? The outlook is bleak, y'all. Okay, just kidding. Well, maybe not kidding, but let's talk about what the future holds for us because believe it or not, I'm an optimist. Trends are just trends. They are changeable. They're influenced by human behavior and action. And despite the damage that threat actors are doing to our organizations and our economy, I believe that you all are the answer. And, you know, for I say a Texas sized problem, we always come up with in my state, Texas sized solutions. But, DHS is anticipating all types of future style attacks, quantum cryptography being broken. There's tons of researchers working on future type threats. A lot of that is deep fakes, disinformation. It's being incorporated into all types of cyber attacks. So we're looking at DHS threat assessments, CISA threat assessments. We know that 90% of cyber attacks involve some kind of social engineering, is basically exploiting human vulnerabilities, the vulnerabilities we have in our own mind, and that there's a rise in AI voice scams, imitating voices, imitating people's faces, all different types of attacks. But we're also looking at major future threats. And I don't know enough. I don't have a PhD in quantum computing to really go in depth on this, but I did want to point out that we have a few problems and we're coming up with some solutions for these. So, one problem would be quantum decryption. It could undermine the security of some of the encryption schemes that are widely used today, such as RSA and ECC. There is potential to decrypt messages, passwords, and keys that are encrypted with these schemes, exposing confidential information. Now, I don't know if you guys saw the warnings from FBI this week or last week, but they've been saying that if you're sending messages from an iPhone to an Android phone or vice versa, those are not secure. They're not encrypted. They're not secure. China knows how to hack all that stuff already. But even more, is that the Chinese government and some institutions there have claimed that they have already found a way to break quantum cryptography. Now, many researchers are skeptical about this, but I can tell you this. There are hundreds, maybe even thousands of researchers around the world, students and nonprofits diving into this problem right now. They're developing quantum resistant encryption methods, such as lattice based or code based cryptography, that are based on mathematical problems that are hard for both classical and quantum computers. So, really nice to know that they're coming up with these solutions. They're working very hard to try to protect the cryptography and the encryption that we already have today. Now, I don't want to go too far on that because we're almost at time, but we know that we are increasingly using AI for good in our industry. I know at Recorded Future, we are one of them. We're using amazing AI solutions to, source together the most valuable intelligence and identify ways to apply it to your enterprise, to personalize it. So we're doing it safely, we're doing it ethically, we're enhancing threat detection, we're using AI to make connections between signals that would take human analysts hours or sometimes days. We're informing industrial incident response capabilities. We're using AI to prioritize vulnerability management and to contribute to engineering resilience against new and evolving cyber threats. So a little bit of hope. We are using AI for good, and we're kind of turning the page on the threat actors, giving them a run for their money. As I close out this threat brief, I want to leave you with just a few tips for countering the threats that I presented today. One is use threat intelligence that is tailored to your organization's risk profile. As a consultant, I always sit down with the security folks at my clients' companies, and I first ask them, what are your top 3 business risks to your organization? And then we have to map our intelligence collection and threat intelligence directly to mitigate those risks. It has to be tailored, it has to be very specific. So if you don't currently use threat intelligence in your organization, let me know if I can help. I'm not a salesperson. I'm not going to try to sell you solutions, but we have a ton of free resources like our web extension and our mobile app to help you get started on these types of things. Identity intelligence is going to find those compromised credentials that are out there before the threat actors can exploit them. Web app security is a consistent priority across organizations because web app exploitation is one of the top threat vectors. And there's also other types of intel. But I want to remind you that more than ever, we are globalized and geopolitics across the world is going to impact the United States. It is going to impact our organizations, whether you are US based or global organization. Geopolitics is a primary driver for cyber threats today. So, in order to understand what is ahead and what's coming at you and get ahead of that threat, you have to understand the geopolitical dynamics as well. So dig into what's happening in other countries. How is this going to impact our supply chain? And how can I protect, or how can we protect our companies and organizations from those attacks? Now, last but not least, I want to remind you that sharing is caring, collaboration is key. And as Caitlin Jewell, the Associate Director for International Affairs at CISA, said, helping other countries to harden their defenses really denies those malicious actors opportunities to practice their tactics and undertake those attacks that could harm American interests. So when we want to focus on what's right in front of us, our own security and our own supply chains, but we have to improve at collaborating with other countries and collaborating with other companies in our industry. And there are safe ways to share intelligence among those that are targeted by the same bad actors. It sounds like CISA is finding constructive ways to do that. So reach out to them, reach out to your threat intelligence providers if you have them. And just want to say thank you for having me back here. If you would like to reach out and connect, my email address is here. But I do have, I want to take at least 5 minutes to just open it up and ask if anybody on the call has any questions about today's presentation.
Cassandra, why don't you ask a question?
So the question is very in depth. So I just wanted the resources that she had mentioned about the vulnerability and especially specifically the identity vulnerability.
Hmm.
But after I posted my question, she mentioned her email. So I'm just going to grab that and utilize that to reach out.
Awesome. Yeah, let's have a chat. I would love to tell you
Yes,
more.
1000%. I'm so excited. And your presentation was absolutely amazing. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm so glad you posted the media bias chart, Lisa. That looks great.
Yeah, pretty interesting.
Keep in mind the people that made that chart are from various countries, backgrounds, political leanings, and they check each other's bias. They have a very intense rubric, a scoring system for truthfulness and for and integrity and bias. So I find that chart to be pretty accurate. A lot of people ask me like, how do I know where to go for information? I know it's really hard to trust any mainstream news. I understand there is inherent bias in all information out there. But instead of like getting caught up in it, I recommend maybe checking multiple sources. Maybe if you only watch one channel or you only read news from one source, maybe try to go find out what other people are saying about that same topic or news. Usually, if it's breaking news, um, you'll see kind of the same headlines everywhere. Like, somebody was assassinated or murdered on the street. Like, that's just very straightforward. If it's political in nature, I highly recommend looking at multiple sources.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else with a question for Charity before we let her go pick up her kids?
Hi, Charity. Just a real quick question about the attacks on infrastructure in particular. It seems that we've gotten kind of lucky here in this country that the exploits have not been of huge impact. But are you seeing other countries where it is like like when there are successful attacks and it's bringing things down, and there's a need for recovery and everything like that? And like if so, like how likely is it that eventually someone's gonna get lucky here?
Well, thank goodness we haven't had, I almost don't want to say it out loud, we haven't had a wormable uh, attack in quite a while, knock on wood. But unfortunately, the US is not just number one in targeting, but also number one in payout.
Hmm.
Um, I think ransomware is the biggest problem, and they are using those types of 0 days and exploits to conduct those ransomware attacks. Um, I think other countries are looking to us for the postmortem. They're looking to us going, "Hey, you guys are the ones experiencing these hundreds of targeted attacks. What kind of information or intel do you have through your incident response process?" And one thing that I'm very concerned about is the telecom hack that was just revealed from, China has compromised all of our telco companies. The fallout for that, we don't even fully know the fallout, but I'm guessing it's pretty heavy. We know that they conduct espionage operations, but they start with a wide net and go narrow and more narrow until they get to a specific human target or company target. So that's where you really want to tune in to government agencies like CISA and DHS, find out what they know, um, do threat hunting in your security team, and be able to set up those defenses right away. I will say there are other allied countries like the UK, Australia, and Canada that are targeted for similar reasons as we are. And we all have very similar tactics and indicators of compromise that we're exchanging. Oftentimes we're confirming each other's like, okay, that's what you saw, that's what we saw. So it's very similar country to country.
Thank you. With respect to the telco vulnerabilities and the recent reports, how effective do you think apps like Signal are for text messaging that do the end-to-end encryptions? Like, is this something that is recommended to be adopted? I've been using it, but just kind of curious if that can mitigate that.
Well, I really hate to recommend one particular application because as we know, any of these apps can be vulnerable someday to exploitation. But I can tell you what I've done over the past couple of weeks. I've
Mhm.
gotten my entire immediate family to switch to Signal for
Okay.
family group chat, which was, was kind of twisting their arm, like, come on, get on Signal. Well, trust me. Some people recommend WhatsApp. I
Oh,
personally
okay.
don't
Yeah.
trust WhatsApp as much as Signal. Um, but I think Signal's your best bet right now, especially if you're texting somebody often, you have an iPhone, they have Android or vice
Mhm.
versa. Like I have an iPhone and my brother's on Android and I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, family, everybody's getting together in a group message in Signal right now.
Well, thank you very much.
Um,
That's good to hear, actually.
yeah, so that was FBI's recommendation. I took that very seriously, but these recommendations really have been around for quite a while. We just didn't know that these types of technologies were being actively exploited for espionage, and now we do. And that's basically all we know right now. I think it's the findings are gonna be pretty drastic. I think
Mhm.
when they do reveal the full scale